In this video, we're digging up pepper plants to overwinter them inside, so that way they'll have a head start next spring. Hi, my name is Bob and welcome to the homestead, y'all. Well, today we're going to dig up some pepper plants. These are some plants I'm going to overwinter this year, so that way they'll have a good head start come next spring. But these plants were planted in July. In fact, I planted them July 4th weekend. So they're not big old monster tall pepper plants. They're smaller, they're compact, and they're perfect to overwinter. Now, pepper plants are perennials, where most of our garden vegetables are annuals, but there's a few that are perennials, along with tomatoes. These are one that are perennials. And the right growing conditions, they can grow for many years. But where we live here in Tennessee, it gets cold, so what we're gonna do is, we're going to dig these up, we're going to put them in a pot, and then we're going to take them inside and keep them in the barn. Unless it gets really cold, then I'll probably bring them in the shop where it's a little bit warmer, because you don't want them to freeze over winter. You want to protect them, you want to keep them dormant, so the warmer they are and the more light they have, they're going to start trying to grow leaves because they think it's growing season. So if you can keep them cool, keep them in that 45 to 55 range, or even 60, that's going to be perfect for them to stay dormant, and they really aren't going to need much light. A little indirect sunlight is all that they'll need. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut all these leaves off, or just about all of them off, with our pruning scissors, and then I'm going to take my pruning shears and I'm going to cut the limbs off that I think aren't needed. All we need is a few limbs at the very top and the nodes, so that way next spring when we plant these plants, they'll be able to put out leaves and they'll take off, and they're going to do great next year. So for now, I'm going to get busy pruning some leaves off. Pruning this plant, I prune them similar to the way I would a fruit tree. Any branches that are growing inward toward the center of the plant, I'm going to cut off. I'm going to cut every one of these off. Now you want to make sure you use a sharp pair of scissors or shears that have been sterilized, because you don't want to transfer any bacteria or fungus into your plant. Another thing I look at is kind of just strange limbs, like this one here and this one here down toward the bottom. I'm going to take those off because next year those are a weak spot, they're a weak point. You can tell that they're weaker branches, so they may break off and harm your plant. Plus I have one growing right here in the center. I took most of it off. I took it down to just one node. So any of them that you cut, you want to cut about a 1/4 inch above a node, you know, where a leaf is going to come out or another branch. Just go about a 1/4 inch above it. Cut all the blooms off, which this one was still loaded with blooms, so I got all those cut off. And I've kind of shaped it up a little bit. Depending on how much room you have, on how much you need to prune it back, I could prune this thing back to about 10 or 12 inches tall if I wanted. But I'm going to leave it about this size. I have plenty of room in the barn. Of course, a few nights I'll have to bring it in. But there's a couple branches that are crossing each other right there, so I'm going to take them off. They're growing toward another branch, and here's another one. And the reason I take those growing toward the inside off, so next year when this plant starts to grow, it's going to have plenty of air movement through the center of the plant. So that way it doesn't get all bushy and you're going to get disease a lot easier. You want plenty of airflow, plus you want plenty of sunlight to get in there to those blooms and to those peppers. But this one looks pretty good. I've got it pruned back pretty good. Here's another one growing toward the inside. I'm going to take him off. I left just a few leaves. You can leave more leaves than this if you want, but it's going to drop its leaves, so you're going to have to clean them up. So the more you take off now, the less you're going to have to clean up later. All right, so the next step, I want to pull this landscape fabric back, take my shovel, and go ahead and dig this plant up. Then I have a 5-gallon bucket, about 3/4 full of rainwater. We're going to wash the roots of this pepper plant. And I'm not going to wash them with any insecticide. I could put some dishwashing liquid in there. But what I want to do is get all the dirt off of it and make sure there isn't any bacteria. If there's any bad roots, I'm going to go ahead and take my pruning scissors and trim those roots up. But I definitely don't want to carry any bugs inside. I don't want any kind of bug. whether it's a beneficial insect or not. I don't want it overwintering in this pepper plant. So we're gonna wash all the dirt off, or most of it that we can, make sure that there isn't anything hiding down in the roots of this. Okay, depending on how big your pepper plant is, on how far out you want to dig, I like to start about 10 inches to a foot around it and work my way around the plant, and then just kind of wiggle and get that dirt loose, and then we'll pull the pepper plant up out of there and try to save as many roots as we can. So what I like to do is just start, like I said, about 10 inches out, and I'm going to go all the way around this, and I'm going to wiggle this as I go, kind of pull those roots up, loosen them up. Then I want to get deeper. So as I go around, I'm going to drive my shovel deeper into the soil. And I can hear those roots pulling a little bit, which that's okay. You're not going to be able to get them all. Okay, I think I have it loose enough. Now what we're going to do is just break this soil off all the way around. Break it off as much as we can just with our hands. Just want to break it up. Now we're going to have some roots from weeds in here also, and we'll get those out too. But we've been super dry, so these roots should be really easy to clean up. As dry as we've been, this dirt should just come right out of it. This one doesn't have a very big root system actually. This is kind of small for the size pepper plant that it is. Of course, I've broke a few off. I can see some spots there that I broke some of these off of. Now what we want to do is finish washing the rest of this dirt out of these roots and make sure there isn't any critters in here. All right, our plant's been sitting in there a few minutes. I just let it sit in there, and especially if it has more dirt on the roots than what this one had, just let them sit in there for a few minutes, let that dirt get nice and wet. And then you can just take that plant and just bounce it up and down. And get as much of that dirt out of there as you can. If you got a little bit of bark in your soil or something like that, you may get a piece tangled up in there, and I would just leave it. As long as there isn't any insects in there, I wouldn't worry about it, because I wouldn't want to rip those roots trying to get it out. Now, these roots look pretty good. They're not as white as I'd like for them to be. Of course, it's late in the year, it's late October. I'm surprised these plants are still alive, to tell you the truth, because we've already had a frost a couple weeks ago. But we want to get down. You can see there's soil packed right in here real tight around those fine feeder roots. I want to get that out of there. And I want to make sure there's nothing living in there. Like I said, if there's just a single piece or two, it's not that big a deal. Okay. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty clean. Like I said, there's a few little pieces here and there. I don't see any insects in there. Roots keep grabbing the soil floating on the top when I pull it out. There we go. Of course, we're off grid, so I don't have an unlimited water supply. This has came out of our cistern here in the garden. This water has. We haven't had rain in about 6 weeks. So we are dry. Hopefully we'll get some rain this weekend. Okay. Well, that looks real good. You can see that's a decent root system. It's not a big root system. I've seen a lot bigger. So now what we're going to do is get us a pot that fits this plant and this root system. So I'm thinking about a 2-gallon pot will work well for this plant. It won't take up a lot of room through the winter, and we'll go ahead and pot this thing up in a 2-gallon pot. Okay, our next step is going to be planting it in our pot. Now I have good clean potting soil here. I like using Pro Mix, but you can use any kind of potting soil that you want. I did put a little bit of bone meal in here, a little bit of blood meal, and a little bit of bat guano. Just a slight bit, because these roots are going to grow some this winter, and so I wanted it to have just a little bit of nutrients to go ahead and be able to grow these roots. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take all this potting soil and I'm going to mound it up in the center. Okay. Now, the reason I'm going to do that is because you see the roots, the way they kind of grow down, and there's a big hole here in the center. We want that hole right there in the center to be right here in the center of our pot. Okay, so I'm going to pack that down pretty good, and then I'm going to lay these roots around the little ditch I made around it to where that crown is right in that little hump in the center. Now we're going to take potting soil and cover the rest of these roots up. Okay, so that's what we want to do. In fact, I'm going to dig that trench just a little deeper around the outside of that. Pack that down where those roots go a little further down into the pot. And we probably could have used a 3-gallon on this, but I think a 2-gallon is going to work fine. Now, we're just going to cover that with soil, and we'll be good. I'm packing this pretty good, pretty tight down to make sure I get good soil to root contact. And I'm still going to leave this crown a little bit higher than the edges, because we're going to water this probably about once a month throughout the winter time. You don't want to keep the soil so wet that it rots your roots, but it needs enough moisture to survive. So we're going to pack them around pretty good. And like I said, leave that crown just a little bit higher than the edges. Now all we have to do is water it real good. Put our plant marker in. This is a patchwork pepper, so I have it labeled. Now these labels I use, these are just old mini blinds that I cut into pieces that were going to the dump or were at the dump. This particular one was, and I snatched it out of the dumpster. And then I use a paint marker to write what it is on there, and they'll last for years, depending on how much they're in the sun. They will dry rot after a while in the sun, but by using a red paint marker, if you use just a Sharpie, it'll fade throughout the summer. It'll last about half a summer, but the paint markers last several years. All right, that's got it planted. We'll give it a good watering. We'll take it in the barn. If you have any questions or comments on how to overwinter peppers, please leave them below. And as always, thanks for watching.